it's very nice to see that people are interested. I have a big passion for brandy and trying to change the perception that people have about brandy. And yes, please ask questions. I've received a few questions that that was asked. I don't know if you want me to go through those questions that you've sent me.
Perfect if you can start off with the questions, and then we can also maybe end up with a few more questions. But I think that the general plan is that they definitely want to know the steps on making this fantastic award-winning brandy van Ryn'S. And also, are you also responsible for Klipdrift, Premium, and all of those as well?
No, we only make the Van Ryn'S and the Viceroy brandies here at Van Ryn'S. So I'm not responsible for Klipdrift Premium. I am, however, responsible for Klipdrift Gold. So let's start off quickly to explain the whole process.
Yes.
So that might be a good start. So we start off with grapes, and from when the grapes are picked and how the wine is made, it's specific for brandy production. So you cannot take table wine and make a good brandy. So from harvesting it earlier in the season where there's less sugar, higher acidity, the wine is made. Big difference in table wine and brandy-based wine is that the winemakers are not allowed to use sulfur dioxide to preserve the wine. So as soon as it's fermented, it comes to the distillery. We don't make our own wine. We buy it from outside. And then we do the distillation process. At Van Ryn'S, we do the double distillation process exactly the same as cognac. And I know one of the questions was the difference between cognac and brandy, and I'll get to that later on. So the first distillation, we do the distillation in copper pot stills, not columns, because we produce pot still brandy at Van Ryn'S. So the first distillation is just to get rid of a lot of the water and the solids that's in the wine. So it takes about 6 to 8 hours of distillation, and we end up with a product that we call low wine, and that's about 30% alcohol. And that is preserved by the 30% alcohol so that we can keep. But it is just an intermediate product, so you cannot, it's not the final product. So then we do the second distillation, and that is really where the art comes in, because there you have heads, hearts, and tails. The heads and the tails contains the flavors that you don't want in your brandy. So that gets collected separately, and you only take the hard part that is about the middle 6 hours of distillation, 6 to 8 hours. And that contains all those beautiful flavors, the fruitiness, the freshness that you get in the pot still brandies. The strength of that final product is about between 65 and 75%, and that's a legal requirement. So normally we distill it to about 68, and that goes straight into maturation. And that is really where all the magic happens during the maturation of the brandies, and it is very important step during the whole process. In South Africa, legally, we have to mature our pot still brandies for a minimum of 3 years in oak barrels. It cannot be matured in a tank like they do with some wines where they add wooden chips or staves. It needs to be a barrel. And also not larger than 340 liters. So it's the normal wine barrels, more or less. We predominantly use French oak barrels because that gives the beautiful characteristics in our brandies that caramel, coffee, those type of characters, vanilla, that we want in the brandies. So for the young brandies, and especially for the blended brandies, we mature it for 3 years. And after 3 years, we take it out of maturation, and then 95% of what comes out will be used in the blended brandies. And those are the brandies that most people know. That's the Klipdrift Export, the Richelieu, the KWV3, that people use in mixers, or with mixers, and we bottle it at 43%. But then the small quantity, and that is where Van Ryn'S play its biggest role, is for the production of the older pot still brandies. So then after 3 years, we identify specific lots of or quantities of brandies that has the potential to mature for longer to become the older brandies. And then we put it back into barrels, and then it stays there for 10, 12, 15, or 20 years or older. And the reason why we do that, the longer you mature your brandy in wood, the softer it becomes. When you taste, for example, a Klipdrift Export compared to Van Ryn'S 10, you will, on the taste profile, you will see it's a lot softer on the palate. And that you can only achieve by maturing it for a longer time. You cannot replicate it in a tank or rush it. There you need to take your time to produce something that is really spectacular. And then after maturation, we will take out the different components that's in maturation, and then we will start the blending process. And that is what I love, and that's an art, because there you play around with the different components that you have to produce something that is better than the components on their own. And that is why at Van Ryn'S we mature our brandies for a long time, and then blend something that is spectacular, that is soft, that is smooth, and that has a lot of flavor. And I think that's the big difference between, for example, the cognacs and South African brandy. South African brandy is sunshine in a glass. You can taste that fruitiness, peach, apricot, that's very typical to South African brandies. Where the European brandies, the cognacs, is much more wood dominated. It has less of that really nice fruitiness, and that comes from the sunshine that we have in South Africa. So our grapes are much more fruity. So yes, that's the production process in a nutshell.
Okay, brilliant, 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 brilliant. And just talk about the angel share, you know, and things like that.
Okay, so during the maturation process, the maturation stores are not temperature controlled. So the temperature fluctuates, and you work with a natural product, a wooden barrel. So every year that the brandy spends in wood, we lose some of the alcohol into the air. And that is what we call the angel share. And when you walk into a maturation cellar, those of you who've been to some of the brandy distilleries, you can smell it in the air. And we are willing to give that 3% per year to the angels, because that also helps the brandy to become softer and the flavors more integrated. Okay, so one of the questions was, what is the difference between cognac and brandy? Very simply said is that cognac is brandy. It is just a brandy that's produced in the cognac region of France. That's the only place where you can produce a brandy and call it a cognac. And also the distillation process is different from, for example, French brandies, because in France they produce brandies as well. It's a double distillation process in copper pot stills, and then the product is matured. But the big difference between brandy and cognac is just the region. It's area specific, like Champagne and Port. It's area specific. So our South African pot still brandies are produced exactly the same as cognac. So it's almost, you can say it's South African cognac. We are just not allowed to call it cognac. So that is why we differentiate between blended brandies that has 30% neutral wine spirit in it, compared to pot still brandies that's 100% pot still, double distilled, matured for a minimum of 3 years.
Absolutely fantastic. If we could, we'll ask Grant and everybody that's there to also ask a question. So let's just start with that. I'll start with Grant Lodewijks from the Vineyard Hotel. Grant?
Hi there, good morning. I got a question though. When you start the maturing process, do you mature it in one barrel for the 15 years, or do you change into a second barrel or a third barrel?
Good question. For the first 3 years, it stays in the same barrel. Then after that, we will take it out and put it in older barrels, because then you get most of your color into the brandy in those first 3 years. Afterwards, you use older barrels, and then you can change it. We frequently taste it and smell it and see if it's developing the way we want it. If not, we will put it in different barrels. So from after year 3, you can change between barrels. It's only the first 3 years that it has to stay in one barrel or in the same barrels.
Okay, thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay, Justice is from Southern Elangeni Maharani in Durban.
Yes, I just wanted to continue on the question with regards to the barrels. I wanted to confirm if you during maturation, so you have to keep maturing up until you reach the actual product that you're looking for, or if it doesn't reach, do you continue with maturation, or what do you do after that?
Okay, so after 3 years, I mean, for the rest of the time, we expect it to mature the way we want it. But if not, we will put it in different barrels. Or if we see, for example, after 8 years, no, this is not going to work, then we can work it away in blended brandies, for example. So that is why we are very specific at the amount of, or the type of brandy that we mature for longer, to make sure that it has the quality to mature for a 10, 12, 15 or a 20-year-old. But we can work it away in other brandies if it's not developing the way we want it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Pleasure.
Okay, so we've got on the 12 apostles.
So, what the reason you're not using stainless steel tanks? What are the main reasons you're not using them to mature the brandies?
Okay, first of all, legally we are not allowed to do it. So we have to adhere to very strict regulations around brandy production in South Africa. Our legislation is, I think, the strictest in the world with regards to brandy production. And we prefer that because that makes all the producers adhere to the same standards, and that is why we produce the best brandies in the world. But also the interaction between the brandy and the wood and the air makes it softer and the flavors more integrated. So if you try to replicate it in a tank, you will not get that interaction and the smoothness and the softness of the brandy after a certain amount of time.
Keegan Terry from the Belmont Mount Nelson, next up.
Right. Each year, do you use grapes from the same vineyard to keep consistency for your brandy, or do you use grapes from different vineyards?
We more or less get it every year from the same producers, so it's from the same vineyards because we have contracts with them. Over the years, we've seen where we get the best brandy base wine, so we have fixed contracts with those producers because they produce the best. So yes, it comes from the same area, more or less from the same vineyards.
Good question, Ron. Devika, Taj.
So I wanted to ask this, so what is the smoothest brandy in South Africa?
Not an easy question to answer. There's not one that is smoother than, or that is the smoothest. The older brandies will be smoother. For example, a Van Ryn'S 20 and a KWV 20 will be smoother compared to Van Ryn'S 10. So the older brandies will be smoother, but there's not one that is the smoothest.
Smoothest, okay. Thank you.
So where wine still matures in a bottle, brandy stops maturing once you take it out of a barrel. So I can take, for example, a Van Ryn'S 12 out of the barrel and put it in a stainless steel tank and leave it there for 3 years. I cannot now say it's a 15-year-old. It stays a 12-year-old. So maturation stops once you take it out of a barrel. And then also there's no change in your product when it's in a bottle. So you can buy a bottle of brandy today and keep it for 30 years if it's still sealed, and it will taste exactly the same as the day you bought it. It doesn't change over time because of the high alcohol content of a brandy. Hello, you can come and visit me. You're just next door.
I will come. I have, so you say that you receive, do you receive the grapes or you receive the base wine?
Yes, the wine.
The wine. And then
yes.
What would be the optimum ripeness of the grapes? Do you have specific optimum ripeness?
No, we actually do not want them too ripe because the alcohol content, as you know, in South Africa, the sugars in the grapes is quite high, so you end up with something that's 15% alcohol. We want the grapes to be picked when it has a low sugar, high acidity content.
Okay. All right. So
so when the wine is produced, it needs to be around 10% alcohol.
10%. Okay.
Yes.
And then, so do you decant brandy or does it oxidize?
No, that is where we are lucky. It doesn't oxidize. So that is also why when we do maturation, we don't have to top up our barrels because it cannot oxidize. So you never top up a barrel and you just leave it for the 3 years or then afterwards for longer. So yes, brandies cannot oxidize, luckily for us.
Oh, that's good then. Okay, that's all for me.
Thank you, Katso. Thank you, my love.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I've got Lovejoy here from Element House, who was our 2019 Wine Student of the Year, the Distell and Hotel Challenge.
Wow.
Yeah. So thrilled to have him.
Oh, thank you so much. I don't have any question at the moment so far.
You do have a question?
No question at the moment.
No question at the moment.
Okay.
Okay, Lovejoy has prepared some fantastic cocktails, which I'm going to put alongside the features that we're going to put onto Showcook. So it's nice to include him. I've got Danielle Faree from the Lord Charles, Somerset West. Danielle?
Yes.
Yes.
I just would like to know, where does your water supply come from?
We use municipal water, but it goes through an RO plant, reverse osmosis, to get rid of any chemicals or heavy metals that can be in the water. So all the water is treated that we use in our process during maturation or blending. We use reverse osmosis water to make sure the quality is always good.
Okay, I've also invited some of the young stars of 2019, which is the Reaching Young Stars, and that's Sam Kelesiwe from International Hotel School.
My questions have been answered already.
Okay.
So I've got nothing on my side at this moment.
Okay, fair enough. And sending lots of love your side. I've got Angel from the Durban ICC.
Good morning, how are you?
Good, and you?
I'm well, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say I'm so happy to see so many women in control. So that actually makes me want to know, how did you actually get where you are now as a woman?
I studied to become a winemaker, and I've never made a drop of wine. So when I finished my studies, I ended up being being appointed as the production manager at the whiskey distillery in South Africa. And that is where I fell in love with producing spirit products. So I made whiskey for 9 years, and then I moved to Ryn'S because I still love things that comes from grapes. And so that is how I ended up in the industry. And it is just, yeah, I love it. And I was taught by very knowledgeable people about distillation. That is where I started, distilling. And then I moved to maturation and blending, and yeah, now I love the whole process. So it was an interesting journey, and I never expected to end up here, but it's a fulfilling job because not one day is the same. It's different, and you do different things, and that is what I love.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Angel. Hello, Patuma.
Hello?
Yes, hi.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry guys. I don't have any questions at the moment. I'm just happy to join the meeting. I've been struggling very much with the Zoom, but now I've got hold of it. At the moment, all my questions have been already answered.
Fantastic.
Great.
Okay, thanks, Patuma. Brilliant. So Marlene, from our side, there's, I think we are all on board for this, and effectively the brief for the wine stewards is definitely to have a perfect serve, or however they deem it. But finally, it's actually about creative cocktails and how the cocktail culture in South Africa needs to be on par with the world, so that if we have a cocktail in Cape Town, it must be the same as you have in Paris and London. And I think their fundamental understanding of respect the spirit is there. But in the same vein, when they do put a cocktail together, it is something of a wow factor that they have to.
Yeah, I think South African brandies, especially the younger brandies, lends themselves to fantastic cocktails because they have so much flavor, and you can experiment with it. There's different flavors. We have such a wide variety of different brandies that you can make. I've tasted amazing cocktails, from warm cocktails to the normal cold cocktails made from brandy. So I think it's so versatile that you can make do a lot with it. Yeah. So I think go and play. There's so much you can do with brandy in cocktails.
Absolutely. And then as soon as we can effectively come to Van Ryn, we would love to come again because it's such a beautiful, exquisite distillery, and something that's so accessible. So we look forward to, if not this year, then next year. But just, yeah, thank you for your time and for joining us today. It's been wonderful to have you with us.
No, it's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. And please come to Van Ryn's once we can see each other again, not via screen. So yeah, I hope to see you towards the end of the year or next year when everything has settled at Van Ryn's to come and see what it is all about. We do bottling here now as well. That's a new thing that we've added to the distillery. So you can now see the whole process.
Fantastic. That is excellent. Yeah, I think that'll be, we would love to do that. Definitely. Thank you, Marlene. And
it's a pleasure and good luck to all of you.
Wonderful. Thanks then. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye.